Olympics, the largest sporting event in the world, with athletes participating from around 200 countries. More than 5 million people attend the event, and approximately 3 billion people follow the Olympics via television and streaming platforms. And because of that, an event of this magnitude should have countries competing to host it on their soil. The host country is sure to attract tourists from all over the world and gain significant recognition. However, the reality is quite different. Most countries now are avoiding the Olympics, and no one wants to host them. So, what is the reason behind this? If we look at the statistics of countries hosting the Olympics in the last 20 years, we'll notice something strange. In 2004, 12 countries applied to host, and the committee eventually chose Athens in Greece. In 2008, 10 countries applied, and Beijing in China won. Since then, the interest in hosting the Olympics has gradually declined. In 2012, only 9 countries applied, and the number kept decreasing until only 5 countries applied for the 2024 Olympics, with only 2 remaining by the time of voting. Because of this, the committee did something it had never done before. It decided to award the 2024 Olympics to Paris and the 2028 Olympics to Los Angeles. This decision was made because the committee feared that no one would apply to host the 2028 Olympics. Although this situation is strange, it has deep roots. The fear of hosting the Olympics began in the 1960s, specifically with the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City, were the most politically charged games to date. Just days before the games began, many students protested against the Mexican government's spending on the Olympics instead of on social programs for the country. This led to clashes with the military, resulting in the deaths of 200 people and more than 1,000 injuries. During the medal ceremony for the men's 200-meter race, American athletes Tommy Smith and John Carlos, who won gold and bronze respectively, raised their fists in a protest against America's treatment of black citizens. The International Olympic Committee, IOC, and the American Committee saw the gesture as against the principles of the Games and expelled both athletes from the Olympic Village. After these events, the IOC found itself in a difficult situation because no cities were bidding to host the Olympics. Eventually, one city stepped forward with a bid, but with a condition. They would not spend a lot of money and would make use of existing facilities. They wouldn't build anything new specifically for the Olympics. University stadiums would be used for the events, and student housing would accommodate the athletes. This bid came from Los Angeles, and the committee, having no other options, readily accepted the offer. And indeed, in 1984, the Olympics were held in Los Angeles and were considered one of the most successful seasons, especially financially. This success encouraged countries to resume bidding to host the Olympics. With increased competition and demand for hosting the Olympics, the committee regained control of the situation. However, instead of adhering to the model used in Los Angeles, which was a successful example in every aspect, they started imposing more and more conditions each year. New venues and stadiums, more luxurious accommodation for athletes, and new sports that required new specialized facilities. All of this, of course, was funded by the host countries. With increased competition, countries felt greater pressure to make their bids more attractive. And the only way to win was by building more. When Sydney was chosen, it built 15 new stadiums and housing facilities for 100,000 people. Athens built 22 new venues, and Beijing built 12. The following graph shows how the cost of the games has skyrocketed over the last 30 years. For example, the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics cost the state $1 billion, while current costs range from $10 billion to $25 billion. These figures only include the sports-related costs of the games, excluding the new public transportation systems needed, development projects that most cities spend millions on, and other such expenses. That's why, if we calculate the expenses more accurately to see the total costs, we find that Beijing spent $45 billion on the 2008 Olympics, Russia spent more than $50 billion on the 2014 Olympics, and Tokyo spent $35 billion on the 2020 Olympics. They all spent much more than the initial budgets they had planned. The bigger problem is that the Olympic Committee itself starts giving directions to the host country saying, "We need 30 new buildings for such and such a game here," or "We need a new transportation system between this place and that that place, and so on. Naturally, the host city must comply with the committee's demands, even if it means exceeding the country's budget. The state budget is exceeded, and then they are surprised to find that the expenses far exceeded the limits they had set, as happened with the London 2012 Games, which were supposed to cost £2.4 billion, but ended up costing the government £13.5 billion. After all this, there are two questions that arise. The first is, don't these countries receive millions of dollars from advertising, broadcasting rights, tickets sold daily, and tourists coming from all over? The answer is, of course, yes. There are revenues and deals that do happen. However, if all this is summed up, it will be less than what the state spends on the Olympics. The 2016 Rio Olympics cost Brazil at least $13 billion, while the revenues they received from the Olympics were only $9 billion, part of which went to the International Olympic Committee. Thus, the expenses were greater than the revenues. As for the second question, isn't it true that the host country for the Olympics will attract attention and tourism will increase for years to come? Shouldn't this be considered a gain? This question was thoroughly examined by economists from major universities worldwide, and a series of studies and research on past Olympic Games concluded that the return for the host country in terms of tourism is almost negligible, even if the host country is primarily a tourist destination. In fact, in some recent Olympic Games, tourism numbers actually decreased. Like London in 2012, tourism decreased by 5%, and in Beijing 2008, tourism decreased by more than 20%. In 2004, a study was conducted on 4 cities: Seoul, Sydney, Barcelona, and Atlanta, all of which had previously hosted the Olympics. The study found that tourism significantly decreased after the Olympic season ended. Another study conducted in 1996 confirmed that the long-term impact on tourism in all Olympic hosting countries was minimal, if noticeable at all. In terms of economic impact, a 2024 study provided a definitive conclusion. Based on all previous research, the economic impact of hosting the Olympics is less positive than anticipated. Most cities that host the Olympics end up with significant debt. To conclude with an important question, isn't it true that the money spent on hosting the Olympics is supposed to go into developing the country's infrastructure? In reality, the situation often appears to be about development, but the reality is somewhat different. For example, when Russia hosted the Olympics, they spent $8.7 billion on a new railway project and highway for the city of Sochi, where the 2014 Olympics were held. Economists consider this project to be one of the country's most failed investments. In Rio de Janeiro, $4 billion was spent on a metro line connecting the beach areas with the Olympic Center. After the Olympics, this line benefited only a small number of residents, despite the city's actual need for a metro line to serve crowded neighborhoods. The line was built specifically for the Olympics, leaving the much-needed metro line for residents unbuilt. Due to these issues, many countries are now thinking carefully before bidding to host the Olympics, as it involves investing money, effort, and time with questionable returns for the country. All of this was one thing, but the scandal France created during the opening ceremony of the 2024 Olympics is another. And that's it. Bye.